Good morning, everyone. I want to first thank Jerome for his relentlessness in inviting me to Keynote this morning, to thank the Keynote sponsors, the staff of ABC, as well as the planning team, which has been incredible. I am excited to do this presentation with you all, and um, want to just sort of share just a little bit about this to say that this is not a message, a celebratory message. Let me say that. Oftentimes, and we love to celebrate, we have great things to celebrate in our community, and that is one of the reasons and ways that we gather. But this message really is meant to be a reminder of a call to action that has gone out. I said when we did the sort of preview at the Bag Live on Tuesday night that if you're someone who is waiting for the alarm to be sound, waiting to get the call has gone, the alarm has been sounded. And so we find ourselves here today with a sobering message that I hope will inspire, move, and motivate you all is our intent. So my message is entitled, How Are Our Children? Rochester's urgency for community-driven interventions to reconstruct our village, and really beginning to think about Rochester's urgency for culturally responsive and community-based interventions. So I have a PowerPoint presentation I will share with you all. We'll move through. I have intentionally left lots of time for us to I'm going to stop screen share for 1 second just to start the PowerPoint. I've intentionally left time for us to ask questions and to be able to have some conversation. And we're going to move through there. Share sound, share PowerPoint. Okay. There you go. So I always want, whenever I'm presenting, to provide you all with some information about the Healthy Baby Network. And these are the collection of programs and services that we offer here at the network. The network has been in existence for 26 years. And so I'm proud to say that I've been here a lot of that time. And we've really worked and aligned with ABC and our goal of focusing in on vulnerable families and providing services, but also focused on social justice, focused on being sure that we're able to help families move through the needs of things that are represented. I want to dedicate my presentation this morning, this keynote, to Anthony Hall. Anthony Hall is a community advocate. He's an employee of the City of Rochester, the Pathways to Peace program, and he attended the Healthy Baby Network's annual conference in October. And when he, as part of the panelists, one of our panelists for that conference, one of the things that he said was that for him, village was gone. He really didn't feel that anymore. And it broke my heart knowing a little bit about his background and his work and who Anthony is, because he comes from a family that's very much focused on our community and very much focused on the health and the wellness of our village and of our folks. And so when he said that, it hit me hard. It was something that resonated with me. And when Jerome asked me to do the keynote, one of the things that I was reminded was of our children. And secondly, then Anthony's quote. So wanted to put this up. I wanted to dedicate that to him. I didn't know about some of the other things that are coming. And so it was also confirmation for me. It was a timely message. Some of you may be familiar with the Bible, and in the Bible, there's a prophet whose name is Jeremiah. And Jeremiah wasn't a really popular prophet. Most folks like prophets because they liked foretelling. So they like to have a sense of what was to come for them and have some meaning to things that they were experiencing. And Jeremiah's message really wasn't like a happy celebratory rah-rah one. Much like this keynote, it was more of a call to action and a reckoning. And so I'm hoping that as we focus on empowerment, accountability, and our journey ahead, the theme of this conference, that we'll hold those things in mind. So we in Rochester have Rochester has a rich culture, a rich legacy of history, and we have elders and people here who really are the shoulders that we stand on. And so when I think of some of those, I think of Catherine Terrell, who for many years ran a hair salon. I am nervous, which is interesting because I usually am not before I do a presentation. There is a urgency and a push and an anxiousness to me this morning that is typically not part of how I communicate and align. And I'm sharing that with you all to say, take a moment, and if you don't have a pen and paper, grab a pen and paper. There are some things that are going to be said, and we don't have a lot of time, and I'm not going to belabor the points, so I'm going to move fast, which is also uncharacteristic for me. But I want you to be able to capture those things that you want to follow up about and do some work on later. So be sure that you take a moment to grab a pen and some paper. So the champions and the historians and the elders of our community, Catherine Terrell was one. She had a shop on Jefferson Avenue. It was a hair salon for many, many years. There was often, when you went in there, and I was there as a young child, 13, 14-ish, and then like early into the late 80s. And Catherine, because she also did a lot of community organizing, you would often find other folks in the community having conversations about things that were happening. And I often think of her as one of the people who brought people together. I think of Andrew and Gloria Langston, who own WDKX and who brought that station to Rochester at a time when there was a lot of civil unrest, if you will, a lot of the same sorts of things that we are wrestling with now, but they had the pressure of being the first. We have the legacy of their work to sort of stand on. And so why this is important is because these people brought people together. I want to tell you about the Maasai, and the Maasai was a warrior tribe in Africa. The Maasai are not gatherers or peacekeepers. If you were to be looking over the hill and see the Maasai coming, you knew that you were not going to have a conversation. There was not going to be any tea. They came as warriors. They were fierce warriors. They were feared. And their greeting was, "How are the children?" And the response that came from the warriors was, "All the children are well." So I'm going to play this YouTube video. You can find it on YouTube.
You know SEO. What if you could do it smarter and faster? With Wix, you get a site.
Among the most accomplished and fabled tribes of Africa, no tribe was considered to have warriors more fearsome or more intelligent than the mighty Maasai. It is perhaps surprising then to learn the traditional greeting that passed between Maasai warriors and "How are the children?" It is still the traditional greeting among the Maasai, acknowledging the high value that the Maasai always place on their children's well-being. Even warriors with no children of their own would always give the traditional answer, "All the children are well," meaning, of course, that peace and safety prevail, that the priorities of protecting the young are in place, that Maasai society has not forgotten its reason for being, its proper functions and responsibilities. "All the children are well" means that life is good. It means that the daily struggles for existence do not preclude proper caring for their young. I wonder how it might affect our consciousness of our own children's welfare if in our culture we took to greeting each other with this daily question, "And how are the children?" I wonder if we heard that question and passed it along to each other a dozen times a day, if it would begin to make a difference in the reality of how the children are thought of or cared about in our own country. I wonder if every adult among us, parent and non-parent alike, felt an equal weight for the daily care and protection of all children in our communities, in our towns, in our states, and in our country. And I wonder if we could truly say without hesitation, the children are well. Yes, all the children are well.
So how are our children? Are all of our children well? Have we done the work that we would do when we, take a moment just to vibrate on that consciousness of asking ourselves, how are our children? As we look around our community and we begin to think about how our children are and what are the things that we're seeing in terms of are our children playing? Are they outside? Are they enjoying being able to live and to play and to grow? Are our school age children able to move through the neighborhood, hang out, and play with friends and be outside safely, go to school? And school, particularly for our high schools, is on our minds lately because of all the things that are in the news about the shooting that happened at Franklin. So when we take a moment to begin to think about the beginning of life for our children and taking an opportunity to look at some data, and this is not a data presentation, I'm not going to share a lot of data, but I do want to spend some time talking about Black maternal health and mortality, and a little bit about infant mortality. So on the screen, I have the P9 zip codes, which are our inner city core. It has been called the Fredo Crescent. It has been called the Crescent. I want to just look at infant mortality with the grouping of those inner city zip codes as compared to our county. And so I want to start with when we first started really sharing data to take a look at where we were. And so in 2008, these are shared as infant mortality rates. The numbers are small, so these numbers are always given as per 1,000 births. And we're going to look at them starting in the beginning of when we started to really capture and pay attention, which was 2008. 2017 to 19, which was in the middle. And we're going to talk just a little bit about what's happening with 2020 to 2022. So here, this line represents infant mortality within the inner city for white women. This line represents Hispanic women, and this line represents Black women. And what's interesting is that, we look at these numbers and we look at the gaps. This space in between is our health disparities. These are the numbers that when we talk about the differences between the health outcomes of white women, and in this case, these are babies. This was infant mortalities, babies who died before they were a year old. So when we look at white babies, these are Hispanic babies, these are Black babies. And so two things most important about looking at these numbers and how they have grown. Overall, in health and birth outcomes, the US does not do well. For any race or ethnicity, we know that that is particularly true and pronounced for African American women. But we also know that for the dollar investment, the US spends more per capita than any developed nation. Our health outcomes really mirror what we see in some of the least developed and least medically resourced areas of the country and of the nation. And what we notice here even more profoundly is that in the recent years, these numbers have gone up. Now, I also want to talk about, as we move later into talking about some of the opportunities for advocacy, the way that data is shared has changed dramatically, and we are no longer able to get local numbers quickly because of a change that happened in the state with how they want numbers shared and trying to balance the protections of the people who are represented in this data and our ability to have data that helps informs programs. More dramatically here is to look at Monroe County as a whole outside of the P9 zip codes. And so here we see that these numbers are, this again are white babies that have died before they were a year old. These are Hispanic or Latinx is a term that we use now. And then these are Black. And so in both cases, when we look at Black babies, we notice that there are trends where those numbers are moving up. And we know that that's happening as we look at what's happening in our hospital systems around health disparities and the work that really has spawned a lot of our attention around paying attention to preventable death and taking deeper looks. We know that the root causes of health disparities are a complicated mix of the social construct of the systems and the ways that they've been developed, and that their development and that reinvention or reimagination has not kept pace with our desire and our need for it. And then when we look over here at Black maternal mortality, we see these same trends. And again, these very same pronounced disparities, differences that really ought not be. These are not differences that are all about, in any of these cases, let me say, that are about access to dollars or access to care or only access to income or education or jobs. These are understanding that Black women and Black babies do worse on all health indicators than white babies, and that the commonality between education levels, income levels, where people live, our backgrounds, and our ability to do work is the fact that they are Black. And so when you look at, bias in our systems, when we look at the way that those systems were designed, when we look at and address things around access, which both include where care is located and what hours it is open, those things work their way into our ability to be able to access them, to be healthy, and to have the information that really allows us to be healthy. So again, I would ask you, how are our infants and our mothers? And I put pictures in every single presentation that I do, most especially if I'm presenting data, because I want us to never, ever forget that embedded in those numbers, embedded in those disparities are people who have stories, and that each of us brings to our work with our contributions and our skills and our talents, a story to tell that explains how that data exists, that explains how those numbers came to be. And let us not ever forget that, because those numbers and the stories are also those keys and cues as to how we then work to change. It does us almost no good to only talk about data absent the stories and the lives and the experiences and the contributions of the people those data represent. So how are our children? Now, this is a busy slide and it has a lot on it. So let's start at the center. This is called the life course care continuum. And in the life course care continuum, it recognizes that we go from pregnancy to adulthood, but that these are different domains. So when you follow it in this direction, we have pregnancy, infancy, childhood, and adulthood. And in each of those domains, we have interactions between these things here, our biology or our health history, the environment within which we live, our own behaviors and those of our culture and our family. We have individual interventions that are one-to-one about the people. We have organizational interventions, which are about the agencies and institutions that function in that community or in that neighborhood. Those of us who work at community-based organizations are part of those organizational domains. Then we look at structural, and structural really began to be those political things. So like the city of Rochester as an employer and a health and human service provider, our governmental system as a structure of health and human service provision. And then these are the things that we sometimes forget, that our community has its own set of assets, supports, and resources that sometimes move independently of the organizations and structures that are operating within our neighborhoods. And why is that important? Because how you feel about our community and our people who are in it and our houses that are in our neighborhoods and the way that those neighborhoods functions will inform their either support or suppress the interventions and things that then get designed and how we move through them. And so when we look at this life course health continuum, we acknowledge that those interventions and those assets and those behaviors are different during pregnancy, or should be different. And so the targets for those, the interventions that are crafted, should also be different. We see the same in infancy, the same in childhood, the same in adulthood. And so in thinking about it in that way, that gives us the opportunity to be intentional, to be strategic about how we approach that work and about how we move forward and move through the things that we are working to talk about and the things that we're working to accomplish. Also recognizing that all of us as the individuals that come collectively to do that work in different domains within these different life course pieces. And so we want to be sure that when we're talking about pregnancy interventions, that along with medical professionals, and prenatal care providers, that we're also talking to students, that we're also talking to women and men who are going to be pregnant. And whenever I say that, I always get a pause or a funny look. Men, if your wife, partner, or girlfriend is pregnant, you are pregnant too, right? And so you have interventions and assets and supports and resources that impact the quality of our pregnancy. How are our children? How are they in infants in their pregnancy, in their conception, in their development? How are our children as they are outside of the womb, growing through infancy and meeting those milestone health and behavioral attainment? Okay. So before we set out to do work, we need to have some shared agreement about what that work is and what the focus of it is and what is the priority. Now, I very easily could have put up the Nguzo Saba, which really talks about how some cultural agreements and shared commitments. I recognize that not all of us have those, and on that pen and paper that you reached for in the beginning of the presentation, you should write Nguzo Saba, particularly if you don't know what I'm talking about and you've never seen it. But to begin to base some shared agreements on what that work looks like, because again, if we're talking about how we're going to have culturally responsive and community-based interventions as to how we are able to answer with confidence and with the authority of the Messiah, all the children are well, then our first agreement is that we've got to be able to center in on people always, that always has to be the focus. It has to be the focus of how we resolve issues and questions that come up, as to how we agree to how we're going to move forward, and that the focus of centering on people is the thing that will move us together as we shape and craft interventions, that we really begin to create and nurture, and that is intentional. You cannot nurture anything that you have not put time in to create, but that we create and nurture relationships with those who are most impacted by the things that we're talking about first, and then prioritize their contributions, their lived experience, their expertise, their ways that these challenges are landing for them. Because without that, everything, we might come up with a great idea, right? But those things won't be what I like to call is the litmus test to an idea. Is it relevant? Does it mean something to the people that you are working with, or to the direction or the thing that you are prioritizing and targeting? And is it responsive to what we've heard? Does it fix a problem? Then we need to frame our relationships in terms of lifelong impact. We need to understand, Elder Hanif calls this not having transactional relationships. We come together, we do a thing, the thing is done, and then we move on. But recognizing that we're going to live together in our community. We're going to live together in our neighborhoods. We're going to work together within agencies that are based and focused on addressing the challenges that are in our neighborhoods. More importantly, I might see you in the grocery store or at the car repair shop. And how I've treated you in whatever other setting we were in will impact the quality of that interaction in the grocery store. And I think most of us know that you're more likely to have a much more honest interaction in a grocery store sometimes than in an office setting. So we need to be transformative. And when I first heard this word, I didn't know what it meant. I had to go and look it up. Transformative is the process of reconsidering what it is you think you know. I'm going to say that again. Transformative is a process of reconsidering what it is you think you know. And why that's important is because some of us don't know what we think we know, and some of us learned it wrong. And some of what we learned doesn't apply to the things that we are working to address. So we've got to be able and be willing to go back and re-examine those things. And then we need to acknowledge and celebrate our community, our members, and the spirits and expertise and contributions of our community members, because as we show up, we bring all of those things with us. And when we recognize and honor that in each other, that's when the work happens, right? How are our children? My friend Melanie Funches says that children who don't feel love from their village will burn it down to feel the warmth. African proverb. So as we begin to really think about what are those community-based, community-driven interventions that are culturally responsive and are community-based, we've got to move forward acknowledging and honoring the kinship and the royalty of African culture and history. Too many of our children don't know that there was royalty. There are those among us who believe that the history of Black people started with slavery, and that's just not true. We've got to be able to acknowledge what the disruption and the legacy of chattel slavery is, and what that continued impact is economically, on our health, on our functioning, on our communities. You've got to be able to be intentional and purposeful about being sure that men and fathers and boys are at the table when these conversations are happening. We talk about not for us, without us, but too often those tables are, full of women, are full of people who don't look like the people who live in the neighborhoods or who are the targets of the work that we're doing. And then when we bring those folks into either organizations or to tables, we don't spend the time working with them to ensure that it's an equitable space, that they feel honored and respected and valued. It's not just about inviting them to the table. If your point is to say, we invited folks to the table, we have consumers at our table, there are parents at our table, we're done and you're ready to check the box, I would caution you on that. Because until you've prepared and helped them feel supported to be able to contribute, your work is not done. And we've got to reevaluate information and data. Those things are part of the story. The stories are the part, it's that part. But we need to remember, reconnect, repair, rebuild, and reconstruct better relationships. It is a value. We as an African people are relational. Let me say also publicly right now, mark the moment that there is work that needs to be done with people of the African descent here in Rochester, but there's also work that doesn't let anyone else off the hook. It doesn't let white people off the hook. It doesn't let our Latinx community off the hook. We need to remember and reconnect and rebuild. Some of us, in fact, need to go back and apologize. Some of us have wronged other people in ways that have hurt them, that they are no longer willing to come to the table or work with you. Some of us need to go back and apologize. And when those apologies come, some of us need to be ready for them. And by that, I mean willing to accept the apology and the work. I'm not saying that you wipe away everything that happened or forget what you've learned, because some of those things happen as a result of us needing to learn a lesson, and that lesson showed up. But we need to be able to move forward together from there and understand what that means. And so, find and create your circle. Your circle there ought to be at least 2 people who are close to you and in your inner circle, who love you, as my coach says, and she taught me, for real and for free. They're going to love you in spite of, they're going to love you because of. One of those people needs to be someone that you can go to and be able to tell all the stuff. We all need at least one person that we can stand true and transparent in front of, in our strengths, but in our challenges and in our weaknesses, to be honest and to get the help that we need. The other one, and I dare say at least both of them, need to be able to hold you accountable. Because there are going to be times, if you're really trying, then there are also times when you are failing. And you need to be able to fail in a way where it doesn't need to be on the news at 6. It doesn't need to run live at 5, but it needs to be open and honest so that you have the opportunity to learn the lesson, to heal, and then to be able to seek forgiveness if that's something that is part of it. We need to value our community assets and intellect, because both of those things are there. Focus in on our families and what our needed supports are. Going back to those commitments that we have, or the Nguzo Saba, it talks about that we are our brothers and sisters keepers. We are collective in our work, in our design, in our functioning, but also in our restoration. So all of that is needed. I'm going to skip 10 because it's connected. We need to redesign our continuum of care and disease management. Right now, our system runs on illness or sickness. Something's wrong, I go and get it diagnosed, I get a medicine or something for it. We have really got to begin to focus on the pre-prevention part. So the prevention is to prevent the illness and disease before, but the pre part of that is the knowledge and information that gets us to not need the prevention, because it's ingrained in who we are and how we work. And then we've got to be honest about what's our individual work and what's our collective work. No one holds Sherita Bullock more accountable or responsible than Sherita Bullock does. I am for real, for true, for honest. I have done my work to be able to stand transparently in front of people. And there have been times where that has cost me, but you know what? The way you heal a thing is to drag it into the light. So I offer these, I leave these in terms of what are some of the elements. This is not an exhaustive list. There are other things that need to happen, but this is the beginning, because the call it's gone out. We look at this analogy between police officers and firefighters. This is not to say that one is better or more important than the other. We need them both. But a police officer shows up after an incident has happened. They're there to take a report and to dispense a form of justice. A firefighter runs in while the building is on fire. The thing is going on. They are there to deal with that thing, to save lives and get people out, to put out the fire and try to protect the structure. And then there is a focus that is on, fire prevention and education. So there's a role and a lane for all of us here, but far more of us are needed to be firefighters and advocates than there are to be the police officers or the reporters in that analogy. And part of the reason that the work is so hard is because there is so much of it to do, because some of us have abandoned our posts. Some of us need to go back. You are in place and it got hard and you left. To those of you who are in the midst and your work is hard, I'm gonna say to you that you are probably exactly where you need to be. Look for your help, but continue to fight, continue to be advocates, most especially to become champions of the families who are in our community, because they are needed. COVID has really driven us apart, and we have not remembered, all of us, how to come back together. And so within that, all the news is not horrible. There are phenomenal things that are happening across our community. There are phenomenal things that are happening in families, but they're happening despite the challenges that we're going through, not because of. And we've got to be able to come back together and address those. I was telling somebody yesterday that I remember being young, and when my grandfather had to call a repairman, oftentimes we would see an older repairman and a younger repairman come out together. And the younger repairman was a person who had the strength. They had just come out of school. They had, the knowledge, but what they did not have was the experience. The older repairman brought the experience. He brought those resources and those tips of, when that lever in the back doesn't work, sometimes you can just cut. You don't have to replace the whole pipe, cut 2 sections and splice in a section. We have lost our ability. When I look around and I see a lot of repairmans, and we had an electrician at our house recently, there's an older gentleman, there wasn't a younger gentleman with him. And we've lost our ability to intergenerationally connect. You've got to remember that there's a framework for that. We have a framework, we have a structure. Our elders knew it, our elders did it. But what we have got to begin to do is to reconnect those generations. We have got to begin to move differently than what we have. Sudden miracles are happening every single day all across our community, but do not mistake them for the success of hard work and sacrifice, because a lot of hard work and sacrifice has happened. So to those of you, I want to say thank you to ABC for this keynote. I want to say thank you. I know that I went a little over time. I hope that this was helpful. I hope that it was inspiring. I hope that you all found yourselves in this work and see yourself in this work and as part of the solution for how we move forward, because there is lots of work to do and lots that still needs to happen. So how are our children? Our children are not well because our adults are not well, but we have work to do to move forward. So Paula, I see you. I'm going to stop my screen share and say thank you and be done.
Well, thank you, Sherita. Thank you so much. And we actually have one quick question. This is from Kayla. Can you, I don't know if we have a little bit of time for this. Can you expand a little bit on why data is getting harder to access locally rather than information being shared for the benefit of the community? Let me repeat that. Can you expand a bit on why data is getting harder to access locally rather than information being shared for the benefit of the community?
I'm going to say that I believe the state believes that they are trying to protect what are relatively small numbers. Rochester, we talk about a lot of times, is a big, really small community. And so when there are things that are being reported like maternal deaths or infant deaths, because depending on the timing of that report and how small that data set is, it may be really, really easy to figure out who it is and what happened. And so the intent is to be able to, I believe, protect the rights, the confidentiality of that family. I think that we have work to do, right? And part of that work is around working with the state to ensure the release of information for health improvement and in the ways that we as community want to use it. But I also want to say that there have been times where we haven't always been, and I'm saying the collective we big haven't always been responsible. Everybody knows of a HIPAA violation that has happened where somebody's information got leaked out in the community somehow, and that was a violation that I believe that they are working to protect. So that is why I believe I am also attempting to work with a group of folk. I was reminded when I went to ask for some data that this is something we said that we would do to really try to address getting the state to understand our need to have data for health improvement and to be able to share with people to understand how broad these issues are and how they're landing for us. But there's, again, I just continue to say there's work to do there.
Well, thank you so much, Sherita, and thank you to the audience for your attentiveness.